Well, dude, thanks for being here. And most of all, thanks for kind of giving me the nudge to start a podcast. It's not something that I really thought about doing until you said, "Hey, man, you should start a podcast." So, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm glad you took the nudge. I mean, we kind of had the conversation before, but we've known each other for a bit, and I think that I thought that the show was an amazing opportunity for you, but I also know enough about production, or just you're with 12 people. How much time can they give to one person? And I think you have enough going on in your life. You're involved in interesting things. You do photography. You do a ton of outdoor stuff. You're an athlete. And so I thought this would be a great platform to kind of show off some of those things, to also for you to dig into some of those things. And additionally, selfishly, or maybe not so selfishly, I wanted to see the opportunity go as far as possible for you and Elizabeth.
Right.
And I think owning your own space, whether it's for me and my own business, for you in your own, the things you're doing personally, if you have something that you can actually put your name on, that you get to decide how things get edited, what gets edited out, what you keep, how you present yourself to the world, like that's something that's valuable.
Right.
And so I was excited that you asked me to do it with you, because honestly, I was 100% game for just saying, do it, go for it, like have a blast. I look forward to watching it. But we've also kind of been looking for something to do together for a while now, and we've dabbled in that. So it's actually fun to I feel like this week has actually kind of been startup week.
Yeah. And it's cool because last time I was the one giving the nudge for us to shoot a documentary about you and your story. And then now you're the one giving the nudge for me to start a podcast. But also I think I'm looking at it a little differently in that I don't really want it to be about me very much. I have a relationship with social media that's kind of strange, in that I like telling stories on social media, and yet I hate that social media gets misrepresented a lot. But the reason why I stay on it is mostly because I get messages several times a week or several times a month from people who actually thank me for posting stories about the things that I do, because they tell me that it inspires them to go outside and do things or try harder things in their personal life and stuff like that. So seeing that other people are inspired by me, I think the obvious thing to do is to interview and have conversations with people who inspire me, so that they can see that I'm small beans and there's like a totally different level that of human out there that inspires me to get out and do the things that I do. And so that's kind of where I am now. I listen to a lot of podcasts and I draw inspiration from those people, and I follow people and I draw inspiration from them. But there's sort of a filter in that I'm not the one asking the questions. I'm not the one who gets to dig. I'm just listening to someone else have a conversation with those people. So this is a chance for me to ask the questions that I want answered from the people who inspire me, and hopefully the people that, listen to the podcast can draw inspiration from that and live a better life, find a way to, be more them in the same way that I try to be more me every day. I'm always trying to find what it is that brings me joy and happiness on a daily basis. And that's kind of my one goal in life. And the inspiration I get from other people helps me do that. And so in the same way that I try to be more me every day and do more things that make me happy and bring joy to my life, I want that for other people. So it was pretty obvious that you and I needed to sit down and have a conversation, because you've been a person who's inspired me a lot in the past.
Thanks.
You've done a lot of incredible things, and the one that stands out the most is your journey with weight loss and your approach to health and happiness at the same time, and the way you've kind of combined those into one, because you didn't compartmentalize and say, here's my health and here's my happiness. They were one and the same.
For sure.
And I noticed that, and you did things to take control of your life that other people aren't willing to do. So, let's get into it. Why don't you, tell everybody a little bit about what you went through and how it went down?
Yeah. And we actually met kind of, I think at the, not to say the tail end, because I would say that that myself, and I think we were all still in process. But we certainly met much further into it than I was. So it's
Right. I didn't know you
correct. Yeah.
during the story. I heard about it secondhand, and then we made the film about Leadville, and I got to like see part of the story, but I didn't get to see a lot of it. I didn't get to see the details. So
yeah. So I guess to briefly kind of give the Cliff Notes version, so to speak, at about 27, I found myself at 297 pounds. Throughout high school, I kind of put on weight. Even like middle school, middle school is probably where I started putting on weight. High school is where I started putting it on. Traveled for my first, basically took a gap year out of college and kind of actually trimmed down a little bit, became a little active, and then got into college, and the freshman 15 was the freshman whatever 40, and it just kept piling on from there. And as I started college, I also started my business. So I was 19, and because of low cost of living, I was able to be a full-time photographer, basically at 19, not because I was really busy, but just because, my rent was $150 a month. And, I was focused on my career. I was focused for some time on school. And so health was never in the equation. I was married at the time. I'd always been a little bit bigger. And basically between the ages of 19 and 27, I gained, 80 or 80 plus pounds. I don't actually know my official top weight because I would go months or years without getting on a scale. Whenever you're overweight, when you're obese, the last thing in the world you want to do is get on a scale.
Right.
And so I found myself at this place where I was, I'd been for a very long time uncomfortable in my own skin, uncomfortable in the world, uncomfortable in a lot of situations, in a lot of different areas, emotionally, spiritually, physically. There were just so many situations where I found myself just arrested by the fact that I was overweight.
Right.
And I kind of had a perfect storm of events. Number one, I had a close friend who was also a photographer. So he was a colleague who died. He was in his early 40s. He was a close friend, and I realized he was a little older than me and looked way better than me.
Right.
And that was kind of a wake up call because he was my first like real peer to pass away. Died of a heart attack on a softball field. Was a nurse. Had a family of heart disease, a family history of heart disease. And that was a real wake up call. I had another friend of mine who I'm still close with who was a little older than me and was kind of in a similar place of weight as me. And he had had a ton of surgeries and he had a ton of health issues. And I just realized, I kind of saw myself in him in the future. And then simultaneously, my friend Udi gave me a bicycle. And at that time I was 297 pounds. And I always say it, my first thought was like, what are you doing giving a 300-pound man a bicycle? Physical activity, much less biking, was the furthest thing from my mind that you could possibly imagine.
Well, and you were living in South Louisiana. You still live in South Louisiana.
Correct.
It's not, for everything that is amazing about South Louisiana.
Yeah.
Health is not really part of the equation there.
Correct.
Why is that?
I think, we've talked about it while I've been here in previous, there's some limitations about what's actually available to you. You have to work a lot harder to create outdoor activities that are comfortable and enjoyable throughout the year in South Louisiana. You come to a place like this, you can really kind of play in nature 365. You really have to want to play in nature in Louisiana in the summer. It's pretty miserable. And then, I don't know if it's, cause or effect, but as a result, you kind of put priority towards other things. You put priority towards family, towards relationships. And where do those people gather? Food.
Right.
So food becomes, anybody who has heard of Louisiana has heard of New Orleans.
Yeah.
Not that I'm from New Orleans, but,
spent a lot of time there.
Spent a lot of time there. Yeah. And Lafayette, which is more or less where both of us are from, was named best place in America to eat by, I don't remember, some show or.
Well, the food in Lafayette's even better than it is in New Orleans.
Correct.
At least in my opinion.
Yeah. And if you'd asked my 300-pound self, I would have agreed. And so
you knew quite a lot about food at that point.
Yeah. I'd have been a good food partner. But honestly, I think that, we in South Louisiana, you have such a passion for food, for people. And, we don't naturally gather in the mountains. We don't naturally gather on the trails. We naturally gather around a table.
Right.
And, you eat a meal and you talk about where your next meal is going to come from. And there are some wonderful things about that, because there are memories that are created with family members. There are bonds that are created. Unfortunately, the way that the food has developed, it has gone towards what is the most delicious, who can cook the best. It's turned into a competition.
Yeah.
Every meal is a competition. You're trying to beat somebody who's cooking with you or eating with you, or you're trying to make a better gumbo or whatever it is than somebody else's mama. And it's kind of a bastardization of what food, in my opinion, really should be, which, I've kind of taken a 180 where now it's just like, it's fuel.
Yeah.
It's going to be
eat now. And
it's going to be over in 10 or 15 or 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And I really don't care. It's going to be over, and it's just a memory at that point. But then I have to deal with the ramifications of that decision for much more than 15 or 20 minutes,
right?
Which is a complete 180 from the way I used to, think about food. And so, found myself 300 pounds, and kind of with this, perfect storm for the first time in my life, asking myself, can you do something about it? Because one of the things that was different from me than a lot of the other people I know who have lost a lot of weight is I had never tried it before. I wasn't a yo-yo dieter. I hadn't had these big weight loss and weight gains, which is very different than a lot of people. I know a lot of people who've lost a lot of weight, and I'm kind of in the minority in that. And I think I just hit it. I'd always kind of told myself, these are the cards I'm dealt. I was given bad metabolism. So I'm just going to, this is my lot in life. And I'd never questioned that. And so.
Do you think that that's true?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's what you told yourself at the time, but now you don't believe that you were overweight because you have a bad metabolism or because of your genetics.
I know that I wasn't overweight because I had bad, genetics or metabolism. I do think
that's interesting, because they do play a part.
I think that, there's a doctor that I kind of follow, and he basically says, genetics load the gun, but you pull the trigger.
Right.
And
That's a good way to put it.
The reality is, if I kind of go off the rails, which for most people wouldn't be, if I have a little too much, which I don't eat that much, but if I have a weekend of where I have a couple cookies, my wife bakes, for example, my wife and I can eat the same exact thing. I will gain weight. She won't. I mean, your wife,
I'm in the same boat.
You're in the same boat, and so, some of those things play effect. Like, there's no denying it, or else I wouldn't have gotten to 300 pounds in the first place.
You still have to take the responsibility, though.
100%.
Yes.
And that was the thing. I had lacked the responsibility. I had put a lot of time and energy and effort into other parts of my life. And, one of the realizations now is like, you want to be an engineer, you want to be a photographer, you dedicate a ton of time to that.
Right.
I want to be a skinny person. I have to dedicate a ton of time and effort into that. I can't I can't leave that as the last thing that I consider at the end of the day, which took a long time to get there. And I'm still in process.
It takes a long time to get anywhere that's worth being.
Correct. Exactly. No, yeah. It's hard work.
So we're at that point in time, was there anyone in your life who was pushing you in that direction, or saying, hey man, maybe you should rethink?
Not at all. No.
Really?
And I've learned this. I'm sure maybe you have or haven't had the experience, but now being on, a little further into the journey, I've had some of those tough conversations with friends, and I've seen them react the way that I probably would have reacted.
How did that go?
Oh, terrible.
Really?
Oh, they almost always go terrible. Because when you're so overweight, or when you're overweight at whatever degree, it creates a point of sensitivity. It's a button,
Mm-hmm.
and anything that even remotely, for the most part, and maybe this is controversial, but I don't think people are happy being overweight. You may put on a facade that you're okay with it or you're happy with it, but all of the things that you don't speak about when you say that you're happy with it are not worth being unhappy about. When you look at yourself in the mirror and you're not happy about that, I don't care what you say about like, oh, I'm big and I'm happy about it, but it is a mask. It is a costume that we put on.
Right.
As a previous overweight person and knowing a ton of people who are and were, it's a mask that you put on to say, no, I'm okay with this. Like, all is okay in the world.
Right.
But but then you go home and you're by yourself, or you go in your bathroom, or you are in the shower, and then you have this experience that you're, there's nobody to show off in front of, there's nobody to impress. The amount of issues that are created mentally and emotionally by being overweight, whether it's things that you just feel about yourself, or it's things that you are projected on you by other people, because they look at you a certain way, or it's things that you think are projected on you by other people because you see somebody look at you just because you walk into a restaurant, and instead of thinking like, oh, hey, how's it going, or nodding your head, you think they're like, oh no, I hope he doesn't sit next to me. Or, an airplane's a perfect example.
Right.
You build up these stories in your mind, and there's not necessarily any truth to them, but because you've spent so much emotional energy preparing yourself to go out into the world to appear comfortable, it's, you've got a rat's nest inside of your mind.
Well, I wonder if this conversation came up the other day in a different setting, and what came to my mind is, I think the topic of the discussion was attraction. And what came to my mind was, well, maybe there's an evolutionary aspect to this, that, if you see someone who's underweight, it's not usually that attractive. And if you see someone who's way overweight, the same thing. And there's a sort of a middle ground, and it's because that middle ground is where health lies, usually. And I wonder if that's evolutionary, that, like our ancestors were most attracted to what they saw as health because that meant longevity. And
well, you look at the portraits of the kings, they weren't exactly svelte.
You're right. So maybe that's not
maybe it's to your point or not, but and just to go back to, to kind of wrap it up, I hit 297 on a scale. It was one of those rotary style scales. It did not go over 300. And it had been, months, years that I had gotten on a scale. I'm sitting there in front of a mirror, uncomfortable with myself. I'm looking down at a scale, and it's slowly, the needle is just going up.
Right.
And it's like time is, suspended.
Warped.
And I'm just thinking to myself, is it going to get to a point to where it's basically going to tell me I can't come up with a number for you? And then it went to 297, and I don't know why. There's no telling why something happens on a particular day, but I just made a promise to myself that I was not going to allow myself to get above 300 pounds. And it was the first time that I had actually made a decision to take care of myself. The first time I had made a decision to do something about it, because prior to that, I had basically sworn off the idea of anything. I'd given up. I'd given up before I'd even gotten into battle, so to speak.
So what happened next then? Because you didn't get over 300 pounds.
Yeah.
You made some changes.
So a couple of things happened. I kind of got started. I was very closed off to food. I mean, we're knocking on the door of Thanksgiving. My Thanksgiving meal was usually turkey, cheese, bread, and then pie. And that was it. There was no color on my plate. Everything I ate was beige. And that was just, that was how I ate. I mean, it really, I say that because it sounds good, but that was the truth.
Right.
Literally everything that I eat now is nothing that I ate previous.
Right.
And I realized at a certain point that I had to develop a certain level of openness. If I wanted to, what I was doing did not work. That was obvious. So if I wanted to move in the other direction, I had to be willing to open up my mind to other things.
Well, it probably also forced you to seek happiness elsewhere, because I think a lot of people seek happiness in food.
For sure.
And it's so temporary.
Yeah.
It's like the most temporary joy that you can have on this earth is eating, because 100%. It's over the second that it's over.
Yeah.
And whereas other things, I would say other experiences last a lot longer, because you remember them for a longer period of time. You have an experience, and then it stays with you for a while, because it brings you memories. But I don't think I've ever had food leave a lasting impression on me. I mean, there are good meals that I've had, but it seems so temporary. So I'm assuming that once you took so much emphasis off of that part of your life, you were forced to seek happiness elsewhere, and you found it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and one of the gifts that the journey brought me that was unexpected was I started to show myself that I was capable of things that I didn't think I was capable of previously. Just the idea of losing 5 pounds was something that I previously thought I was not capable of. And so, when you see yourself do something new, there's a level of pride that comes with that. And, I think a buddy of mine, Josh Lajani, somebody who is a bud and kind of introduced the idea of, or introduced the term of that relationship that you have with yourself. I probably would have never used that before, but I did not have a good relationship with myself. I did not think great things about myself. I didn't think I was capable of a ton of things. Professionally, yeah, absolutely. Personally, but as far as like taking care of myself, turning myself into somebody who could run a mile, who could ride down the street on a bike or bike commute, those were types of things that I just simply thought were not in the equation for me. So I started riding my bike around, and I realized that slower pace of transportation, which I would have never thought, where we live, oftentimes if you see someone on a bike, you think that they're lacking financial security.
It's funny.
Not that it's a choice.
Right.
And that's just the reality of where we live, where I was born.
Right.
If I would have been born in Salt Lake City or Denver or San Francisco, maybe I would have seen it differently. And so it really was a matter of I had never had the experience of riding a bike as a mode of transportation. It's like, it sounds goofy, but you feel the wind through your hair. You notice things that you didn't notice anymore. I'm a photographer. I'm a visual person. Mm-hmm. So, there is no better way to explore a city than on bike or on foot,
totally
running or biking or walking. And so this city that I had grown up in, I now developed a new relationship with because of the fact that I just changed the mode of transportation.
Started at a different pace.
Yeah, exactly. And so that happened. I started saying, you know what, I'll just try food. I'll try something that I've always said I didn't like, because there's no way for me I can't undo this thing with the same, approach.
Bring on the kale.
Bring on the kale. No, the kale took a while.
What did you start with? What was the first thing? Can you remember?
I wish I could.
What were some things you didn't like before?
Everything.
I
would eat iceberg lettuce with Thousand Island dressing. I would eat French fries.
Iceberg lettuce. That's the worst kind of lettuce.
I was 300 pounds. It just, there just wasn't like, I'm not joking when I say that everything I eat now are things that I didn't eat before. Potatoes, I guess you could say I ate before. That's obviously still true to this day. But the potatoes were, that was like going and getting a po' boy with French fries. That wasn't eating a big potato or a sweet potato. So it really was one by one. It was 100% one by one. It's hard for me to even remember what would have been the first thing. Honestly, I started out with things like, protein shakes and stuff like that. Just trying to like,
stay on the side of this tastes good, but it's not totally garbage.
And also, it's funny because my wife, I'll tell a story and she'll still be like, what? But, for example, I'll tell you a funny story. I used to go all the time. I used to go probably 3 to 4 days a week to a fast food place, get one of those ice creams with all the M&Ms and Butterfinger and everything mixed in. That was like 3 or 4 times a week for me.
Wow.
And around that same time, I had never told her this story until recently, but around that, she had forgotten. Around that same time, we ended up out of town, and there was a Dairy Queen, and we didn't have Dairy Queen at the time in Lafayette. And they have the best frozen blended ice cream things, in case anybody's wondering. But they had some kind of mint chocolate chip with like hard shell and M&Ms or something. And I was just like, hey, I'm just going to stop and grab something. And so I'm like sitting there eating it. We're entering the interstate on the highway. And this is super unlike my wife, but she said something to the extent of like, do you need that? Or that's what I heard. Oh, wow. And I rolled down the window and I threw it out. I'm sorry. Wow. Don't give me a ticket. But I was so pissed. But that was what was normal to me. That was just what I did. That was like as normal as tying your shoes in the morning.
But she kind of said something.
She said something. There were 2 instances where she said something in our relationship. We've been together for 20 years. One was in marriage counseling. Before we got married, the guy who married us required us to do some marriage counseling. And she said, I worry about his weight. Huh. That was enough. And then the second time was the Dairy Queen experience.
Well, if you're already thinking about it, it probably didn't take much to trigger it. Like you said, it was sort of
and she may not
a button waiting to be pressed.
She may not even said that. I mean, I guarantee you, anybody that you have in your life that's overweight is sensitive about it.
Yeah.
Like I bet all my money on it.
Well, I mean, I kind of always think that, at least for me in my life, if there's something that I'm sensitive about, then it's probably something I need to change. It's sort of an indictment on the feature.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, you have to be sensitive with a person about this stuff. You can't just be blunt. I mean, you can be blunt if you really care, but it could just like make that person sort of like hold their ground in a corner or close off or whatever.
Yeah.
But what were some of the first changes that you made? And if you don't remember the first thing that you tried.
No. So I lost about 10 pounds, and that was just simply through, I mean, to be honest, any change that I would have made would have been an improvement. Right. You know, just being conscious of what was going in my body was an improvement. So it didn't take much for me to start losing a little bit of weight.
You could have just moved from shakes to cheeseburgers and it would have been all right.
And left the bun off, or I don't know, who knows. But 10 pounds in, I had a friend of mine who was super competitive. And I wouldn't call myself a super competitive person with others. Maybe with myself I am. But I basically picked the most competitive person I knew. I didn't know you at the time. And he was also looking to lose weight. And so we ended up doing a weight loss competition. And ironically enough, the person who won would get treated for dinner at a John Best restaurant in New Orleans. He loves expensive wine. And it was a 6-month competition. So it was enough time to like really do well or really screw up. Right. And so I was thinking, okay, I have 6 months. This could cost me easily hundreds or $1,000 because he could just put it on me when the alcohol comes around at the restaurant. So like I have to win. So with that, I lost 40 pounds. He gained 4.
Oh man, you crushed him.
You know the tortoise and the hare story? It was identical.
He came out of the gate hard.
I mean, super hard. And then I came out just slow and steady.
But that right there is that's pretty common with weight loss.
Oh, 100%.
People go really, really hardcore on these elimination diets and other things that require them to be kind of miserable. And then they, fall off of the diet and it all just like comes back, right?
Yeah. I think too, people underestimate the amount of effort you need to put into the mental side of things, because you can change what's on your plate, but if you don't change your relationship that what you have with food as a whole, it's, you do anything for a week, a month, a day, right. You can press through, but when you're looking at the long game, you're looking at, okay, what do I want life to look like in 6 years? Right. What do I want on my plate in 6 years?
Yeah.
And then also, I do think at a certain level, you just have to develop a relationship with food that it's not so much of a pleasure center in your life, because it can be, and it is, and it can be wonderful in that very fleeting, instantaneous moment. But as soon as as soon as you swallow the bite, as soon as the plate is gone, as soon as you leave the restaurant, it's over. Yeah. And you are dealing again with the ramifications of that decision for days, weeks, months, or years.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you approach that relationship change?
I think a lot of it was just developing some openness. I was very honest with myself. Like when you say, hey, I've been dealt these cards, I can't do anything about this. It's really easy in that moment. You defer the blame onto the universe, onto your family, onto your genes, whatever it might be. And so a lot of that was just taking ownership of, I did this to myself. And if I want to get out of this, I'm responsible for getting out of it as well. And it took a long time. I don't have all quote unquote perfect days or weeks or months, but, some of that probably was a little bit of forgiveness and forgiving everything that I'd done for the first 27 years of my life. And then also in different times, giving myself forgiveness for not eating well over a weekend because you went, out of town. But also realizing that you just have to get back up. You have to get back up on the horse, and, I was very fortunate in that the relationship that I developed gave me such the results that I'm here today. And so I have a lot to look at, to be thankful for. And it would take more than what is possible for me to walk away from what I've, what I've earned over these last years.
How did you not declare food the enemy? Because that's something that happens sometimes too. People who are trying to lose weight basically just declare food the enemy and pull away, and they get unhealthy for other reasons.
You mean like they just starve themselves?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I've never really thought about it like that because number one, I never tried starving myself. Instead of deprivation and literally just lack of food, my thing was how do I just turn the plate around to where it's completely different food.
Right. Right.
And I realized early on that, look, you got to have a diet that you can eat every day for the rest of your life. And number one, you can access that food both financially and just, like it's available.
Right.
And then secondly, that you're willing to, have that food day after day after day.
I mean, I assume you had to cut calories to some extent, right? You were probably also eating too much food, not just the wrong foods, right?
Correct. Yeah. I think whenever I was an overeater for sure. 100%. I would say I consider myself a food addict. Number one, I don't take that lightly because I know, addiction is a real thing. And for some people, not for some people, for anybody who's addicted to something, it can really be a life altering situation. But I didn't have control over it. And my wife can get out 6 chocolate covered almonds and put them on the counter and eat one and then, enjoy it. And then she eats another one. And then I'm like, where's the box of almonds? Like, right. I want them all. If I eat the first one, it's kind of over. So I just don't eat the first one. But I changed the amount of calories in my actual food. I'm sure we'll get to this at some point, but now I eat only fruits, vegetables, grains, nuts, and seeds, essentially. Well, everything else I would, and fruits and vegetables by default typically are pretty calorie lacking.
They're not
dense calorically. And so when you're used to eating a loaf of French bread at Albertsons before you get to the checkout counter and they just scan the bag, if you switch that to, chopped up carrots and apples and oranges and blueberries and potatoes, naturally you end up eating less calories. And then, I would go to, I haven't, not for any good reason, I haven't talked about this a ton, but for whatever reason it was, because obviously I had some things wrong, I would eat most days until I wasn't just full, but I was uncomfortably full. And it's because, to your point, there's a certain amount of comfort that you get out of food. It's a super messed up relationship because, there's a natural disposition to you're stressed out, you eat.
Yeah.
You're tired, you might eat.
Bored,
eat. And it's not necessary, but it's what happens. And then it's also not necessary to have seconds. Is that even a thing up here? Like, does everybody have seconds up here? I think it's certainly a thing where we live.
Yeah. No, I don't think we don't do seconds. But
that was just a nightly thing.
I think the culture is different though. And not just because it's centered around food, but the types of food that are cooked. Like when I lived in Louisiana and we had a family meal, they cooked just a big pot of food. And there was always too much for everybody who was there. Now, when I eat here and we cook, we go to the grocery store and we buy 2 pieces of salmon that are exactly the size that we want. And, broccoli and, whatever, carrots and Brussels sprouts and stuff. And we only really get the amount that we need. And so there's nothing left to go back and get seconds of. There's just no food left. That's just how we cook now.
Yeah. I'm laughing because the amount of Brussels sprouts that we bought the other day, and you probably were thinking, this boy must be from Louisiana. He's bought like 4 times the amount of Brussels sprouts than necessary.
You bought a lot of Brussels sprouts, but I mean, it would have been worse if you had bought a lot of bread. I'd have been a little bit more concerned.
Yeah.
But no, I think that's just, but you weren't purchasing all those Brussels sprouts to cook all at one time either. For sure. You were going to cook those over several days. But I think that's just a difference in the way people cook. and the types of foods that people cook in Louisiana versus other places. And there might be other places in the world where people cook that way, where they make just
Sure.
these huge pots of food. I mean, maybe in Italy, they make enormous pots of pasta and then have a family meal. And so if you want seconds, you can go back to the pot and get more food. We can't do that here because we, grill stuff, and we typically just get, even if we have friends coming over, I always think, okay, we have 4 friends coming over. Each friend needs a piece of this that's this big, and we all need a cup of veggies, and we all need a cup of potatoes, and so I'd like figure out how much food to get, and there might be a little bit of potatoes or a little bit of broccoli left, but not enough to go and make yourself a whole nother plate. But I grew up completely able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
To be able to go back to the pot and get another full plate of food.
Yeah. I think not to like be too much of a stretch, but I think where we live, for, in my opinion, oftentimes the mom might be the one cooking. And oftentimes there's a pride in that. There's also, moms take care of their kids by cooking, by providing. And it's also seen as almost like a compliment to go back for seconds, because it's like, oh, so good, I have to have more.
Right.
And those are all very small, nuanced things that you don't realize are developing that influence the way that you grow up and you become an adult. And then you have these unspoken habits and whatnot that over a long period of time, now you are a 27-year-old man eating twice as much as you need in every single day.
Right.
And I would go to bed most nights overly full. Why would you do that? It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
But it's what I would do.
You feel horrible.
It's undeniable. I would feel terrible most nights.
Well, now that you mention that, I also remember growing up, and not even in my mom's house, but at daycare when I was really young or whatever. The Clean Plate Award.
100%.
Do you remember did you have the Clean Plate Award? It was basically an award for having eaten all of your food, and back then I guess I didn't think about it because I was a child, but now I look back on it and I even see people saying, no, you have to eat all of your food to kids, and I think to myself, why do they have to eat all of their food? That makes no sense. If they don't want any more food, it's probably because they don't need any more food. They're not hungry anymore. And the kid's not, I don't think that a kid has ever starved or died of starvation with food available in the house.
Yeah.
So I also don't think that eat all of your food is a safety mechanism for making sure a child grows up healthy. I'm not a parent, so I should probably shut up now, but you are. So maybe you could give me some clarity on that.
I have a kid now. You're right. 2-year-old little boy, cute as can be. And everybody tells you there's no way to understand the experience of having a child. And you tell yourself that before you have a kid, and then you have a kid, and then it's made real of how you have no idea what it's like to have a kid. And one of the things, highest level of concern for your kid is keeping your kid alive. You want your kid to grow. You want your kid, and there's no guide for this child at this weight, at this age needs to have this many grams of protein or grams of food, or, whatever those things are. So
it probably is, but it's probably wrong.
Or, it's different from kid to kid. A kid that's born at 11 pounds probably needs a different amount of food than a kid that's born at 7 pounds.
I was born at 10.5 pounds.
Yeah. I'm sorry for your mother. And so there is a thing, there is something that exists in your brain from the moment my wife was pregnant. And certainly for everybody from the moment that your child's born, is you want, that's the most important thing in your life is the survival and health of that child. So in some ways, I don't think it's unnatural for you to have a thought of, well, the kid needs to eat all their food because they need to grow, and is the kid not eating enough? Those kind of things. On the other side of things, my dad grew up super poor. His parents, like anybody at that age, in some ways are affected by or a product of the Depression. Whenever you jump from having absolutely nothing and worrying where everything is coming from, and then you have options, then you want to, you don't want to waste. And so I do think some of those things potentially come from noble
Generational.
thoughts. Yeah. And, you know, whether it's me wanting my kid to finish what's on his plate because I want to make sure he's getting enough nutrition and food, or it's, you know, my dad who was raised by his parents who grew up super poor, you know, having that experience and filtering that into, you know, having a kid as well. So, you know, I get it to a certain level. And the other thing is that, you know, especially on your first kid, it's kind of like you're just you're constantly are guessing yourself. You're doing the best you can. You're wondering if you're doing well enough. And, you know, again, you're really just worried about that kid having enough food every day. And, you know, you work hard. That's why you work so hard. You know, it brings a whole different frame to life.
But you don't want to rely on their appetite to keep them fed.
Yes and no. The other thing is, you know, you go to the, which this is not at all to get into a kid discussion or a doctor discussion, but, you know, you go to the doctor first year, it's every 3 months, at least it was for us. And then they're sitting there with a chart and they're saying, okay, your kid is on the 25th percentile or the 3rd percentile or the 17th percentile. And last time they were on the 14th percentile, or maybe, you know, they're on the 20th percentile and last time they were on the 50th. Are they eating enough? And then you're thinking in your head, oh my gosh, am I feeding my kid enough? Is he, I mean, and I know that sounds crazy, but when you have that experience and you're sitting there and you have, you know, this doctor who you're entrusting your child's health to, and they're now creating a measurement for your kid that's getting, you know, compared to the rest of the population, I do see how it can become a thing. Because, you know, even though it may not seem to an outsider, and we don't, I mean, number one, he's 2, so it doesn't matter what we want. He does what he wants. But, you know, I can understand how something in that arena could lead to something like that down the line.
Yeah.
You know, and it is, you know, I think what we're both saying is we have created an unnatural relationship with food.
Well, what is the obesity rate in America now? It's 40% or something like that.
Incredible.
It's unbelievable. And so it seems to me that there aren't that many people who are raised to eat not enough food. It seems like we shouldn't be too worried about someone who, you know, if a child eats half of their plate and says, "Mom, I'm full. I don't want the rest of my food." That's probably not a problem, but you're right. I haven't been in this situation. It's probably a very complex thing. So, but I mean, do you think that you think that America's in the predicament it's in and people get in this, you know, predicament because of their upbringing and the way that, you know, food is to them as a child?
I think so. I mean, it's undeniable, you know, and again, when you're a parent, you're doing the best that you can with what you've got. You know, you're working as hard as you possibly can, regardless of whether or not it's true. You never think, at least this has been my experience, you never think you have enough money. You never think you can work hard enough because you have this other person that you're now responsible to make a great citizen and everything else. It's your responsibility. And, you know, before your only responsibility is, you know, a chia pet and then a dog. You know, it's pretty limited. And you know, it's not that those are not noble causes, but the reality is the stakes are just so high, and it's something that you certainly don't want to screw up. And so, you know, you think about it constantly. It's inevitable. And you know, I was a picky kid and I was an only child, so maybe I was given a little more ability to remain picky, rather than if I'd had siblings and there was no ability to be picky, because you can't be picky for 4 kids, you can be picky for 1. And so, yeah, you could certainly, you know, project that to me. Like I was given the ability to choose what I wanted as a child. Then I was able to choose the ability of what I was going to eat as an adult. And that obviously had some influence on where I ended up. And it has some influence on I'm sure you and any other kid. And, you know, busy parent, doesn't have time to always cook, you know, food for the kids, stressed, stretched financially. That's a recipe for fast food, you know, convenient food, frozen food, all those kinds of things. So, you know, It's a hard nut to crack for sure. And you have to put a lot of time into it. You have to put a lot of time into having a kid. You have to put a lot of time and consideration into what you're actually going to feed that kid as well.
So what do you think society needs to do to change the relationship that we have with food from a young age? Because it's obviously not working.
Yeah, sure. So number one, I don't think I have the answers. I think I'm interested in the conversation, but I definitely don't have the answers. As far as, I think part of what you're getting at is, how am I maybe changing the relationship or trying to form the relationship that my child has with food, and maybe how's that different than I see other people around me or my own.
If somebody's listening and they have a child, but they don't know what they should be doing, or they're just doing what their parents did and they're doing what their parents did. I mean, the reason why technology advances is because younger generations are willing to accept that good is not good enough, and we progress, right? And that happens in science and technology. That hasn't really happened very much. Well, it has happened in diet, but it clearly hasn't happened at a fast enough pace to make an impact on the obesity rate and the health of people throughout the world, to say nothing of people in this country. I definitely feel like I was raised well. I would not fault my parents in the least bit for the way that I was raised in my relationship with food. We didn't have soda. We didn't have that many candies and stuff like that. On the flip side, we did eat a lot of seconds. And when I went to my grandparents' house and stuff, like, food was very abundant, and we were praised for eating as much food as we could possibly eat. And that was part of being a growing boy. That's not, I don't fault them for that. That was just the way that, like you said, it was generational, I would say. But how do we change it? How do we fix it? You have any good ideas?
So I can tell you what we're doing with Louie. That's our son. What we're doing with him. And I should also preface all of this with, number one, my wife is certainly the cook in the family. And she has been, and she's been a huge support through all of it. She does a great job of recognizing things that are important to me and supporting me in those. Food being a huge factor in that. So whenever I told her I wanted to lose weight, she with me recognized that we would need to change the things that we were eating on a daily and a weekly basis. So for example, she would always cut up carrots for me to eat. There was a period of time where I would eat an apple or two in the morning, every morning around 10, and I would eat carrots around 2:30 or 3 as a snack. So it was something that kind of hold me over in those in between times. Especially as I was really early on, eating volume still was something that I guess I had to lean on maybe a little more than I do now. You can't just jump from eating 5,000 calories a day to your point earlier, to 1,500 and then be totally happy. Right. So she would prep food for me. And that's been a big part, all the way through now. But for example, Louis too, he's been in the kitchen and helping stir and helping do things from a very early age. So I think for other people, number one, you have to be willing to probably do a little work in cooking your food. I
think cooking is something that the American population has gotten away from.
Correct. Yeah.
And we notice that we feel better when we cook our own food, and we tend to eat much healthier when we cook our own food. It's when we get our food from outside of the house that things kind of go downhill pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I think, you unknowingly, and I've learned this in the last 2 years, and I'm sure I'll learn it a lot more in the future, you unknowingly just become a complete model for your child,
right.
in good ways and bad ways. And so if we were driving through a drive-through nonstop, then we probably would be showing our child that is what we do as a family. If, we take those kinds of things seriously, whether it's when we go running and hiking and biking, like, we know that those things early on, he has to me, a great vocabulary now as a 2-year-old. And even now he goes, bicycle, stroller, run, hike, backpack, because we put him in the backpack whenever we go hiking. Mm-hmm. And so we're teaching him what it's like to be a human, what it's like to get through this life.
Yeah.
So we can teach him that what it's like to be a human is to drive through a drive-through, or we can teach him what it's like to be for a human is to shop in the produce department.
Right.
And then actually cook that food ourselves and get him involved in the process, and not make it something scary, not make it something that somebody else does. And that's something you have to work at. You know, like anything else, you have to take time out for it. I realize people are busy. We're busy. But we make time for that. My wife, especially. And that's, you know, so I think that's a great place to start. I have my own personal, opinions on diet, which I'm happy to share. And you obviously know how I eat. But regardless of what your macro distribution is, or your paleo, vegan, carnivore, whatever it is, all of those things can still start in the kitchen and getting your kids involved in cooking, you know, not to get on a high horse, but getting them off a screen, not sitting in front of TV, you know, like we don't have a TV in our house. So he, you know, means it requires a lot more interaction with him. But at the same time, the time normally spent in front of the TV we replace for kitchen time.
Right.
You know,
right.
Sundays are kind of our days where we do a lot of cooking and batch cooking. So we do, you know, I'll peel a ton of carrots and chop them up. We'll make a big batch of lentils, a ton of potatoes. You know, we'll do a lot of that stuff on a Sunday so that during the week we kind of set ourselves up for success as far as our food decisions. And we get him involved in that. And he also sees us there, you know, and he wants to be where we are. So, I mean, you know, this is all a little bit of an experiment, a test, because we'll let you know how it works out in, you know, 15, 16 years. But I do think that that's a huge component of it is, I mean, number one, you have to get in the kitchen yourself.
Right.
You know, previous to me being overweight, me losing the weight, oftentimes we would do a frozen pizza with Totino's pizza rolls for dinner. Like that was our dinner. Mm-hmm. You know, we'd go and get, you know, Chinese takeout with egg rolls and lo mein and, you know, whatever fried meat that you can imagine. Well, if that was today, that's what our child would see us doing. And I fully realize that he's going to be a product of the way we choose to live our life. And, you know, it's the same for anybody else. It's a choice, it's a sacrifice. You know, we don't maybe do some other things on a Sunday. We don't go to a football game, but we sit in the kitchen and we cook, and, you know, we want him to be healthy, want him to grow up and have a healthy life. I've known what it's been like to be on either side, and it's worth the sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, when you grow up, you're being conditioned, to understand this is a part of life, and in the opposite direction, the things that you don't do when you're a child, you don't think that those things are a part of normal life. The good thing is that in South Louisiana, everybody cooks quite a lot.
Yeah.
We just grew up with a food pyramid that was developed by the Department of Agriculture, not the Department of Health. And that food pyramid's been making people sick for 40 years or however long it's been around. And I think they've changed that. But I think that, you know, at a young age, teaching a child what foods they should be eating, or just eating those foods with them on a regular basis, is probably the type of conditioning that's going to keep them eating those foods for the rest of their life, and make them, you know, healthier. And they'll probably say, you know, I'm sure Louis is going to go to his friend's house one day and they're going to cook Totino's pizza and pizza rolls, and he's going to say, that's not what we eat at my house. Yeah. And that's going to be foreign to him. He's going to know that that's not right, because that's not what mom and dad does. Yeah. And we're still trying to figure out, you know, I have impromptu interviews with parents who I think are maybe doing a great job, or who have done a great job with cooking and with raising kids. Cause those are questions we're still asking ourselves. You know, we don't have it figured out. We're still navigating it. And, you know, I'm sure we're going to have some days where we do everything right, or we do some things right. And we're going to have some days where we're going to say like, oh, we really, really screwed that one up, you know? And that's part of the experience of being a parent. So getting back to your story, how long did it take you to lose all the weight, and what were sort of the steps, the milestones, and the things that you did along the way? Because I know a lot of the story, and so I know that there was a gradual progression of changing your diet and changing your habits, and those two sort of had an inverse relationship. Your exercise habits transformed in a way that sort of offset your diet. Yeah. In a very it's a very extraordinary change. You completely changed your life. Your life today looks nothing like it did back then. 100%. And I'll get to that, but before we leave the kid thing, I had so
my wife and I kind of have this agreement that once a year I get to do something stupid. And that's usually kind of a big physical effort. And it's just a matter of what we have, what our current life looks like, what we have available to us, time, money, everything else. It's like, okay, pick one thing that really you can do and really look forward to and, train towards and all those kinds of things.
Just one?
It usually ends up being one. Yeah. I don't know if anybody told you this, but having a kid changes a couple of things.
You told me.
But last year my choice was Grand Canyon. So rim to rim to rim, it's like 47 miles.
Yep.
Incredible day. I mean, just an incredible day. Kind of accidentally did it 1.5 times.
Yeah, you had a friend with some problems, did you?
Yeah. And both times were amazing. I mean, even with the problems and everything, we had an amazing day. Second day was amazing. And we stopped in Flagstaff at the Whole Foods whenever we were on our way back. And at the time, Louis was 1. And we sat down.
Wait, did Louis do rim to rim to rim with you?
So Jen was our crew and drove 8 hours. I mean, I ran 17 hours that day, but Jen drove 8 hours that day.
Wow.
Because she drove from the South Rim
to the north
to drop us off to the North Rim to give me like some, sandwich or whatever, resupply. It was really just to make sure I didn't die. I wasn't dead at the other side. And then she drove back down to the South Rim. But we stopped in Flagstaff at the Whole Foods, got pizza. And there was a family sitting next to us, and it was a mom and a dad and 4 kids. And all of the kids were eating they basically bought like a pack of ice cream cones, and they were all eating their way through this entire box of ice cream cones. Like 6 of them. Every single kid at the table is obese. The parents are incredibly obese. And I'm sitting there sore, physically exhausted, really enjoying my pizza.
Right.
And it made me realize that if I wouldn't have done something, that I would have been that dad at that table.
Right.
And my kids would have looked like that. I don't know if Jen would have looked like that, but that the decisions that I made up until that point had potentially changed my family for generation. It had obviously changed the current generation, but it changed the generations to come.
Yeah.
And it made me realize what the actual effect that my choice that day on the scale had and the ripple effect that had over time.
Do you think that's child abuse?
I think I'm not touching that subject.
All right. Fair enough.
I mean, by law, no, but
right.
Yeah, I mean, we live in America. We have free will. We have the ability to make decisions, and I might not agree with them, but I don't think it's doing anything helpful to your kids for sure. Yeah, I think.
Well, there's a reason why kids can't drink alcohol.
I think that you certainly should give it more consideration than most people do, and I don't know that it gets to the point where they should be jailed or their freedoms being taken away, but I certainly think it deserves a lot more consideration than it is, because at the end of the day, you as a parent are forming those relationships that your kids have with food. And those have a huge effect on the health outcomes of those kids. The quality of life or lack thereof that they have, the experience they might have on the playground, all the way till how they may actually physically leave this earth. Right. I mean, those are, as we've said, they're affected. And they are molded in a lot of ways as a kid, so, but again, you're a parent, you're working as hard as you can to make things available to your kids, to make a better life for your kid than you had for yourself, no matter how good that is.
Right.
And it's a lot of pressure. It's a pressure cooker for sure.
Well, I think that I certainly don't think that parents should be jailed or kids should be taken away for that. That wasn't the intent in my question.
Yeah.
But there needs to be some sort of
accountability,
help.
Yeah.
Help. If that is the case, if a parent is obese and their kids are also obese, there's a common denominator.
Yeah. Well, the danger in that though is that you say it's in our genes. And when you look around the people around you and your mom and your dad are big and you grow up big, then it's easy to say, yeah, it is in the genes. It's obvious. How could you argue with that? I am dealing with the same circumstances that my parents and my cousins and everybody else are. the incredible thing is whenever you actually see one person in a family turn it around, and then it jumps from family member to family member to family member.
Right.
And I mentioned it before, but my buddy Josh is a perfect example of that. He was the first one to lose 200 pounds. Now his entire family has lost over 1,000 pounds.
Right.
And, I don't think they're changing their DNA. It's just a matter of one person decided to buck the system.
Yeah.
And we need a little more of that. So
I definitely think that even if there's a genetic component, and there obviously is for a lot of people, those people still need help. And, there's a lot of advocacy for government paid healthcare. But the problem is that you can't provide free healthcare to everyone when everyone's not willing to take care of themselves to the same level. So I would rather see government assist people with their health preemptively, not reactively. Because that's what it kind of boils down to. It's like, well, yeah, we'll pay for your healthcare when you get sick. And it's not when you get sick, it's, you're going to get sick. So you probably ought to take care of the front end, which is diet, exercise, lifestyle. So yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that. But
yeah, and I think, I'm certainly no healthcare expert. I'm certainly not a legal expert. Those types of things, I think, I hate to say it, but have to be left up to the professionals or people who maybe, have a little more experience with it. I think for me, the answer really is personal responsibility. Yeah. Like you really have to take ownership. You can't, blame is a great thing, and it's a very easy thing to lay, whether it's, it's very easy to just lay the blame on somebody else, whether that is the world around you, the environment that you grew up in. It is very easy as someone from South Louisiana to say, well, this is where I grew up. What am I supposed to do about it? Mm-hmm. I'm a product of my surroundings, or, my family. My family wasn't, I didn't fall into all my family's overweight. I was the one who was overweight in my family.
Right.
But it really does come down to personal responsibility. You've got to take ownership. There are certain things that work against you in life, obviously in a financial standpoint, if you're, born into a certain family with amazing opportunities or one side of town or things like that. But there is a certain level, and there's a place where you come to where you say, I'm responsible for my life. I'm responsible for the direction of it. And if I want something to be different or to change, I have to take that on myself, and I have to work hard and drive at that, because, you have a job goal, you have a retirement goal, you have a physical goal. You have to work on that, and that takes personal responsibility. It takes you getting out the door to go for a run when you don't want to. It takes you going to work when you would rather stay under the covers and sleep. And I really think for me, and it's the only reason why some of the other work that maybe I've done with trying to inspire others or motivate others who are overweight is my default is storytelling, mm-hmm. is sharing those stories of people, because I think that when, if I would have seen someone that was at my weight, at my size, and go from that to where life is for me now, not just in terms of the physical accomplishments, but also in terms of just the life transformation, mm-hmm. then maybe that story would give me some hope. Right. And so that's why I agreed to do the Leadville video. It's right. why, I've worked on the documentary, and I did the podcast for years, because I think that that's the person that I needed to see. It didn't need to come from the government. It didn't need to come from, I think I just really needed to see somebody who I could identify with, because I really thought, I thought my weight was kind of a lost cause to a certain extent.
I think that what really inspires me about your story, and what I think will inspire most people about your story, is how big of a life transformation you made and the things that you're able to do now.
Yeah.
And you really did unlock a level. You unlocked several levels in the same way a kid could unlock levels on a video game for the possibilities you have in life now.
Yeah.
Like now it's no big deal for you to go run up a mountain or for you to go run a marathon or run a half marathon. You can just go do those things. You can jump on your bike and you can ride 100 miles. You can do all of these things that you couldn't do before. And those are experiences that you can take with you and have with you for the rest of your life. And then teach your son those things, and he can have those experiences as well. And so you lost quite a lot of weight. You went from 297 pounds to...
Yeah, I think at my lowest I was 170, pretty like no muscle,
Right.
you know, not that I'm looking to get off on the tangent, but you know, when you weigh 300 pounds, there are certain things that you probably won't put me on the front of Muscle and Fitness with a 6-pack. It's just the reality of, you know, I abuse my body.
Right.
And there's some long-term things that you have to pay for that as a result. So I would never consider myself like super skinny. But you know, I usually sit around 177 or so, plus or minus a few pounds, 180. Now I've got a little more muscle, so I'm probably 180. I don't weigh myself that much anymore because I also realize that the scale can be a huge deceiver, and it can be an unfair emotional barometer that shouldn't be given any power.
Well, and I think that's
for me especially.
Yeah, I think that goes for everybody. You took it a step further. You didn't just care about your weight, you cared about your health. And so you didn't just do this to lose the weight. You did this to become healthy and to unlock more possibilities in the outdoors and in life. And so, you know, I know you started off with the bike. And so what was the journey like on the bike? Because you kind of got a bike, Udi gave you a bike and started riding around town. You're commuting mostly, but then you got into cycling, and that's, you know, that's how we met, was mostly on the bike through mutual friends. We went on some bike rides together, and you've done some pretty long bike rides now. Yeah.
You know, the bike was a slow thing. It really went for a while, me just enjoying riding back and forth to work. And, I had an office at the time. And so, it really, you know, the other thing, and you know this, especially being on the bike at a slow pace, at a commuter pace, let's just call it, it's like taking your happy pill for the day, you know, get on a bike for 15, 20, 45 minutes, ride around town. As long as you don't, you know, have a negative situation with a car, it resets your mind. It gives you, it's a stress reliever. It's like free therapy.
Anytime I have a bad day and Elizabeth can tell that I'm in a bad way, she always says, go ride your bike.
Yeah.
Go ride your bike. Because she knows I'm going to come back in a better mood.
For sure. And I think starting out that way was great for me. Like, I didn't start out riding in groups. I didn't start out with spandex. I started out on a fixed gear, you know, $300, nothing bike, just riding around town. That then I put a rack on because I thought, oh, this is cool. I can carry stuff. This is, you know, I burned 0 gas today. I mean, it was really like you have these small little moments, where you realize things, and it's like, yeah, that's obvious. You didn't burn any gas. You're on a bicycle, but you see that and you experience that and you think, wow, like my legs got me somewhere today. Mm-hmm. That was a revolutionary thing for me. And then I did end up riding in groups for a while, and met a ton of people, had a great time for several years with it. And, you know, I made a lot of great friends through it. And what I think, you know, in retrospect, probably my favorite way to ride these days and in the past years is doing, you know, 3 to 6 day bicycle tours.
Right.
And actually, you know, leaving the car somewhere and then just getting on your bike and kind of riding away to the sunset.
We need to plan one.
Yeah, I know. But so I've done a few of those, and those are a blast. Also, because you're not worried about, not that I ever worried about wattage, but, you know, you're not worried about some of those things that you're not allowing. In a way, it's like the scale sometimes can be your emotional status. You know, your computer on your bike can be your emotional status because you can't ride as fast as you could, or you know, whatever. Whereas, you know, you take all that away and then you're on a bike for 6 days with a tent, or, you know, going between hotel and hotel or friend's house and friend's house. That is an incredible way to travel.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in the mix, I started running. And that was not in the plan at all. Early on, I had tried to run. Probably I was a little overweight and overly ambitious. And, you know, I'd have shin splints or my knees would hurt. And so I very, very early on said, I swore off running.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about the bike, though.
Yeah.
If you're overweight,
100%.
running, even at a really slow pace, first of all, you're going to be at or above threshold.
Correct.
Which means you can't hold the pace for very long. And because you're overweight, you're damaging your joints, and you're really abusing your body in a totally different way. And so, but with the bike, you can ride a bike, even if you're really overweight, you can ride a bike at an easy pace and stay, keep your heart rate under control. And you might have to start off with like shorter rides in the beginning, but it's not going to take long to get up to like 20, 30, 40 mile rides and even 50-mile rides. I've seen people who are overweight ride their bike well over 100 miles.
Yeah.
And they're doing it at their own pace, which is fine. And then there's also the element of group rides where you're drafting. And so you're riding with maybe stronger athletes, but you're able to sit behind them and keep up. And
that was me a lot with you.
But that's the beauty of it. You were getting your workout. I was getting my workout. You were sitting behind me, but we were both having a good time and enjoying the outdoors together. And both doing some good for our bodies. That's not something you can do running.
Yeah, no, for sure.
You just can't. If you and I had gone for runs, you can't draft.
Yeah.
We'd have both been miserable because I don't like running either.
Yeah. Maybe you could have put me in a stroller and run with me. No, the running was not in the plan. I mean, it really wasn't in the plan. And I don't say that jokingly. I
went crazy with the run. For something that wasn't in the plan, you sure?
Supposedly. No, I mean, the running was something that it wasn't even on my radar. I mean, I actually, it's funny because bring it back to Udi, we went on early on before I was even like trying to run. I just went for a run because that's like, you're a healthy person. It's one of the things you do. We went for a run at Girard Park, and I didn't get the memo that we weren't going at the same pace, and he started running off. And I got a quarter mile in or so, and he's out of sight by this point. And I'm thinking, why have you left me?
What are we doing?
What are we doing here? I went back to my car and I drove home.
Oh,
I was so pissed. And probably some basic communication was lacking there as far as, hey, we're not going at your pace. But yeah, it was not in the plan.
How did you get started running?
I was always interested in furthering myself physically, just like look, weight. So it was like, maybe if I run, I'll lose a couple more pounds, again, it goes back to you previously think you're not capable of something, then you do it and you prove yourself wrong.
Right.
And so it started out with me just running, a little bit from my house. I remember running a mile. That was it. That was max.
Yeah.
You just want to see what else is there. Sure, it's worth getting into at least a little bit, but Leadville is something that has come up for me over and over again. And I had kind of been running a little bit at home, and had never done a race before. We ended up in Leadville 3 days before the marathon and heavy half marathon. And it honestly seemed like it was like a gift. Like, hey, you're here 3 days before a race on family vacation. Met a guy from Louisiana who was holding a door for me with a varsity sports shirt on. And he said, "Are you in town for the marathon?" And I said, "No." And I looked at my wife and she wasn't happy because we were on family vacation. And he was like, "You should stick around." And I was like, "Yes, I should."
And you ran the heavy half.
And I ran the heavy half 3 days later. The most I had run at the time, I think, was 7 or 8 miles at sea level. And so my first race and my first distance over 8 miles was the Leadville heavy half.
But you hadn't been running consistently. You had run 7 or 8 miles here and there, but you weren't training. No,
I wasn't training. I mean, this is going to sound like a weird statement, but like races don't really appeal to me on a broad scale. Like I'm not one that collects medals.
Right.
And which is fine. Some people are motivated by that. Like by all means, I have plenty of friends like that.
Find your motivation however you can.
Exactly. But that was the first step. And, anybody who gets into endurance sports or gets physically active, it's not that uncommon to hear the name Leadville. You hear the town kind of has a storied past. And so, I had read Born to Run, and, I had heard people talk about this mystical place. And then there we are on family vacation, this place that I had built up in my head. And I suddenly found myself in the middle of running a race. And I got to the finish line, and not at the finish line, but probably 3 or 4 blocks from the finish line, like I started getting emotional, like real emotional. And I'm not a real emotional person.
Right.
And like the entirety of my journey came to me in the moment as I was approaching a finish line. And just like, I really felt like, like I had worked my way to get there, but it felt like I didn't belong there.
Right.
Because I wasn't an athlete. It's
right.
still a word that I'm uncomfortable with. I know it sounds probably silly, but it's just because I had seen myself in a certain way for my entire life. And then here I am. I'm not supposed to be there 3 days before a race. A guy from Louisiana is not supposed to hold the door for me at this random store. Like these things aren't supposed to happen. Yeah. So that's I think really where running began for me in a way.
So after the heavy half, did you start doing events, or did you start just doing personal things? Like, cause you kept running.
Yeah.
And you
went
a little crazy with it.
So I don't know, maybe in a future time we'll get into it, but I kind of have this whole other side where, I had a podcast for a while, ended up interviewing like 104, 105 people for a combined weight loss of like 13,000 pounds. And a lot of those people became friends, and some of those people, I told that I ran, and, they were more into racing than me. And so I said, hey, we should go back next year and run Leadville again. So Leadville kind of became this yearly gathering for all these guys and gals who lost 100, 250, whatever the number is, pounds. So for a couple of years there, we would have 20, 30, 40 people who would all come from around the country and come run the heavy half or the full with us. And so that was kind of the thing that I look forward to every year. It was the thing that I would have in my mind.
So you ran the heavy half a few times.
I ran the full.
You ran the full.
I've actually only run the heavy half twice. I ran it first my first year. And the second time I ran it side by side with a friend the whole way, which was really fun.
That's cool.
And then I ran the full 1 year.
Yeah, and then you ran the Leadville 100.
And then I ran the Leadville 100. Yeah.
That was the big one.
Yeah, that was the big one.
And I remember you calling me and saying, "Hey man, I'm running the Leadville 100.
Yeah.
You wanna be a part of that?" And I jumped at the chance, and not only jumped at the chance to be a part of it, but convinced you to. I was like, dude, let's document this. People got to see this, because I knew that there was, I knew enough about your story with the weight loss and the progression through cycling and running to know that this was something that I wasn't going to miss a chance to capture. And you were hesitant at first, but
super.
Yeah.
Hesitant, scared, all of the things.
Yeah, I don't remember. I mean, I didn't think you were scared. You're just not a guy who promotes your own accomplishments, and there's a lot to be said for that. But at some point you have to realize that your accomplishments have the power to inspire others, and that's what I saw. And I was like, dude, we have to capture this. So, and eventually you agreed, and we took off down that road of not only running the Leadville 100, but filming it and getting it documented so that people could see that you were once extremely incapable of running 1 mile, and then you ran 100 in some of the most difficult conditions. Because for those of you guys at home that don't know, the Leadville 100 is a 100-mile trail running race that takes place at a really high altitude. So the air is very thin. It's hard to breathe. And for someone who's training at sea level, which you did in Louisiana, it's even more extraordinary. Most people who live at sea level don't have the ability to train in a way that allows them to be very successful at the Leadville 100. But
yeah, and to be fair, just I came to Salt Lake for a week that year, which part of that was to film, but obviously I got in some great training with you. We did spend some time in Colorado as well. So I had I knew that I needed to,
acclimate.
I needed to acclimate, but I also just needed to feel what it felt like. I had a good buddy of mine, Gary Stotler, who actually ran the entire course with me before the run. Now we did it over several days, and it was like, hey, I'm going to be here can we do this day? I'm going to be here. Can we do this day? But, I had an opportunity that maybe few get a chance to have, especially on their first run.
Mm-hmm. You put in the work, man.
Yeah.
Look,
sure.
You put in the work.
Sure.
Don't try to downplay it. I'm not going to let you downplay it because this is what people don't do. People want things. They want to run the Leadville 100, but they don't want to do the work.
Yeah.
And I'm inspired by your willingness to do the work, because you always go the extra mile. Like, it wasn't comfortable for you to leave home and travel to Colorado to train. It was probably very uncomfortable. You had to, give up a lot of things. You had to make sacrifices and to go and do that. But you knew that was one thing that was probably required to be able to be successful. So it shouldn't be something that you downplay. It should be something that you talk about. And that's why we're here to talk about your willingness to be uncomfortable and make sacrifices to achieve your goals, because those goals are the things that make you happy. And those goals help you prove to yourself that you can do so much more than you think. And now you're kind of not limited by your own brain.
Yeah, I think part of it too is, number one, there's some flexibility that's maybe not built in, but I've built in, that I've worked hard towards. And I also take these things very seriously, because I understand that, and it's unfortunately, Leadville has a very low finisher rate. And you could chalk that up to a bunch of things, but however you kind of divvy it up, it's heartbreaking. Mm-hmm. Because I, as the person who calls you and says, "Hey, Mark, will you come and run with me?" I know that means that Mark's going to sacrifice money. Mark's going to sacrifice time. He could, you could be doing something else with your time, and you're not the only one. My wife's there. I mean, that year we had a crew.
We did have a crew.
We had a crew.
We did have a crew.
Which was incredible. It was an incredible experience. When I compare that to somebody who maybe comes by themselves or, is kind of bootstrapping, a team together. But I really took it seriously, the fact that you were willing to come, that Elizabeth was willing to come, that all these other friends were willing to come, that we had spent all these time, filming and editing. And, I realized that it wasn't just me, myself and I, that was affected by this,
right.
And then the other thing is that I take things seriously. Mm-hmm. I take my word seriously. When I say I'm going to do something, I mean it. I don't mean I'm going to go and try it. I mean, I'm going to go and do it.
Right.
And I'll put, if I would have broken my leg on Hope Pass, then yeah, that's a different situation. But whenever, you get to a certain point in the race and you either keep going or you don't, and then you flash back to, did I put in enough time? Did I wake up early enough on those days? Did I go to bed, or did I go for a run? And, it does require a certain level of selfishness and dedication that if you're not willing to put in, I was not interested in disappointment that day.
Right.
And people, I hear people sometimes say, I'm going to go and try something. I had a friend who told me he was going to go and try, he may be listening, but he's going to go and try a long through hike. And I was like, you are not trying that through hike. You are doing that through hike. Yeah. Because when you say, I'm going to try, you just gave yourself an out. And I was not willing to, I just wasn't willing to,
Right.
And, I know somebody who we both like a lot, Jesse Itzler, he has a saying, it's remember tomorrow. It's like, how am I going to feel tomorrow?
Right.
Like right now, I want to get off this trail. Right now, I want to stop running. Mm-hmm. I want to get in some warm clothes, some dry clothes.
Yeah.
I want the pizza.
Yeah.
But tomorrow, I got to live with it for the rest of my life, and I hold, you hear it say on Leadville, you cross that finish line, that finish line will, I don't get emotional. That finish line will change your life.
It did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was a special day, for me and for everyone that was there to help you. We all saw something special that day because things didn't go right all day long.
Potato burritos.
Yeah. I mean, just to fill in the listeners at home, Jason started off the race by running the first half marathon at a blistering pace. And we were all like, what is he doing? I think what you ran the first half. You ran the
It
first
was
13
like,
miles in like 2 hours,
yeah, a little under
and
two,
we're
I
like,
think.
does he know that he has to run another 87 miles, or did he forget?
Yeah.
So that was the first thing that I would say we were
A little concerned about.
little concerned about when you ran the first 13 miles that fast, and then you started having some problems, and you started like not, your pace fell off pretty quickly, and
Yeah.
you were losing time, and I remember I was going to pace you for the second time over Hope Pass, which starts at the 50-mile mark and then goes for, what is it, 13 miles we ran together?
I think it's about 10.
10 miles
Yeah.
we ran together. So
It's a brutal 10 miles.
yeah,
To be fair.
it's 10 miles with what, 3,000 or 4,000 feet of climbing in it, something like that. And it goes
I
up
feel like it's 5, but I could be wrong.
5,000 feet of climbing.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's a bunch of climbing.
Yeah. It's the harder side of Hope.
Right. And it goes over 13,000 feet.
12.6.
12.6. It goes up to 12,600 feet above sea level. So the air is quite thin at that point.
And
in the
you're
race.
50 miles in.
And
so
you're
you're
50
exhausted.
miles into the race. But you were getting close to timing out at the halfway mark and getting cut. And that's when I decided to open up one of your burritos, because you had been eating these burritos all day long. And I was like, man, what's in these burritos? Because this is not going well. And I opened up the burrito, and it was like the healthiest thing you could possibly have been eating, but not what you needed that day.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, we're canning the burritos. Jason's going to start eating candy and Coke because he just needs pure sugar. And this goes against all of your health, practices in your daily life. And I remember Jim saying, he's not going to eat this stuff, Mark. He's not going to drink a Coke. He's not going to eat candy. You're not going to get Jason to eat a Snickers. But I knew from my own endurance background that that's what you needed. You needed some simple sugars, and you were probably running low. The burritos were full of basically vegetables and sweet potatoes.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't the type of fuel you needed. But that 10 miles that we ran together was extraordinary, because you basically took how long did you take to get over Hope Pass the first time? 3.5 hours. And we were expecting, we had to make it back over in under the amount of time you took to get over it the first time. And we showed up an hour early, and everybody was pretty shocked. But it was incredible, because I basically didn't give you a choice. I was like, you're going to run at my pace because I have all your stuff. But then we got it was crazy, because you're following me, and I just kept passing people, which forced you to pass those people. But then when we got closer to the top, all of a sudden you hit this other gear. You passed me up, and then you just started passing people up. You were just running past elite runners. And I was like, oh, this is different. He's in a different zone now. And you just turned it on. And that was super inspiring to me. I was like, wow, I'm watching, this dude's 65 miles into the race, or 60 miles into the race. And he's running uphill at a pretty crazy speed right now. And then we bought you, we basically bought you an hour.
Yeah.
And you were able to recover, and you finished the race.
Yeah.
Crossed the finish line. And so that was crazy. That was a really special day to be there and see you sort of, not complete a journey, but hit a major milestone in a journey that started several years earlier, from basically just saying to yourself, I need to not go over 300 pounds. There's a really big mental jump that you have to make, and a lot of mental jumps intermediately that you have to make to go from being a person that says, I don't want to be 300 pounds, to being a person that says, I want to run 100 miles in the mountains in Colorado. And you've made all of those mental jumps, and you're not stopping.
Yeah, for sure.
You're still looking for ways to push it. You want to go back and run Leadville again because you're crazy.
Only if you're coming and running Hope Pass.
I'll run it. I'll run it with you. I'm good for those 10 miles. But what was crazy is that day when we left, we were in the car, and I remember Elizabeth saying, maybe I'll run another half marathon, or maybe I'll run another marathon, or that got her thinking again, because she had ran a half marathon before, and then she basically swore she'd never run again. But then she saw you run 100 miles, and she was like, something special happened today. Maybe I need to start running again, or maybe I need to start, thinking. And I started thinking about running again. And I'm like a cyclist primarily, not really a runner. I run just a little bit on the side, but it was a special day, man.
Yeah.
And I was really happy to be a part of that. And I think everybody else who saw that was really inspired. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about here, because it's crazy. That acceleration from 300 pounds to running 100 miles is unbelievable.
It has been an incredible several years. I sometimes am a little guilty of not having much of a rearview mirror, in that I only kind of look forward, which I think is good and bad. It's good because I'm never satisfied, but it's bad because I'm never satisfied.
I'm guilty of the same, but I think it's more of a good thing than a bad thing.
For sure. And I never want to be the person in 20 years or 20 months or 20 days saying like, oh, remember the days, so-and-so, whatever, like Leadville and that experience of the run, other things I've done, whether it's on the bike or running, they sit with me every day. I'm a changed person because of those experiences, but I'm a changed person to go forward and do new things, not to hang my hat on what's happened in the past. Mm-hmm. I mean, I appreciate them. That weekend, that 30 hours, 29 hours, 25 seconds, 29 hours, 25 minutes, 52 seconds. That is forever seared in my mind. That's how long it took me to cross the finish line.
Right.
But I have to take that and I have to get into the slot canyons yesterday and get uncomfortable.
Right. And
I have to think about, my next adventure. I need to think about the adventures that I'm going to plan for my kid, and also kind of to bring it full circle, I want my kid to see me do those things that seem, impossible, that I want him to see in the same way that I want him to see what we eat. I want him to see us do things as parents that are, I don't remember where the term came from, but BHAG, big, hairy, ambitious goals. Mm-hmm. I want to have those things. And also, you kind of said, it's this crazy story of 300 pounds to Leadville. I also kind of have a hard time sometimes remembering myself at 300 pounds. I have the pictures. I remember what it was like, but I've put such a focus on looking forward that I don't go back and dwell on those things. It's probably why I'm maybe better at separating myself from food and just like walking away from it, because I just know that the only thing I can affect is what's in front of me, not behind me. So it's not worth putting too much focus on it.
Well, your life's probably so much better now than it was then that you can't even remember it.
Correct.
And that's sort of an affirmation that all the work you did to get here was worth it.
Yeah.
And I think that if there's one thing I want people to take away from your story, and this is not going to be the last time we sit across from the table and talk about this, but I think if there's one thing that I want people to take away from this conversation, it's that tie your shoes and then get outside and do it. The hardest part about going for a run is tying your shoes.
For sure.
Everybody feels better afterwards.
Yeah.
Nobody looks back and says, I wish I wouldn't have done that. And so, I think the one thing I admire about you the most is that you're really good at tying your shoes. And I say that symbolically because you find new things to do, and not just physical things, but like this podcast. You found this idea in your head, and you not only forced me to jump in, but you jumped in alongside me.
Yeah.
And in the same way, when I said, I think we should make a film about Leadville, and you said, well, I'm not going to do it unless you run Leadville with me or run part of Leadville with me. You said, let's make you should start a podcast. And I said, well, I'm not going to do it unless you help. So it's also important to have people around you that help you tie your shoes.
Yeah. And I think you saw something in me that I didn't see. and I probably see something in you that you don't see. And it's important to have people around you that see the things that see the potential that each of us hold inside of ourselves, and that have the ability, you know, number one, as a person, you have to have the humility and the willingness to say yes, but you also have to have the people who are willing to pull it out of you, who are going to stretch you a little bit. You know, we went yesterday and had some of the scariest moments of my entire life, but you know, like you pulled that out of me.
Right.
And then it was like, you know, we filmed yesterday, and so we'll have kind of a video diary of a little bit of the trip. But, you know, we went to the slot canyons yesterday, and, you know, I'm having to press this way and do this. I don't even know what the term for it is.
You're stimming across, you're basically climbing in a slot canyon and doing some stimming across the walls to get over some water so we didn't get all wet.
Yeah, but I'm not afraid to run 100 miles.
Right.
But I was, at the beginning of yesterday morning, I was dead afraid to end up 7 feet above ground, using what I obviously did have physical capability to do, but had a huge doubt on whether or not I did. And you know, you brought that out of me.
Yeah.
And that's I think important. It's important who you choose to surround yourself with. It's important the stories that you tell yourself and what other people, you know, tell you those stories are. You got to believe in yourself.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you don't believe in yourself, it's important to have somebody that's sitting next to you who does.
Yeah. Yeah. Your peers will help you break down the mental barriers, so that you can expose the physical abilities that you already possess. And, you know, I think that we do that for each other. And I have other friends that do that for me, and I'm sure you have the same.
For sure.
So, but I'm super appreciative of our friendship and
Yeah.
the things that we've shared in the past. And I really hope that this podcast is a success. But yeah, man, thanks so much. I really appreciate the conversation. We're definitely going to have to, you know, dive deeper into this on another day, and because I think people need to hear the story, and the story's not over.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for both of us. So, well, thanks for asking on Leadville, and thanks for saying yes on this. I think it'll be fun. I think it'll be a great way for you to, you know, show the world that you're a curious person, you know, that you have interests that are inspiring, that can encourage other people to have a better life, that, you know, in an array of different modalities or interests or topics. You know, I know you have obviously a lot of people who are very athletic in your endeavors, but, you know, something I think even I didn't even realize is, you know, you have a big heart for being involved in your community and community activism. And there's a lot of things outside of both of those that I think are going to be a great way to encourage, inspire, motivate people who maybe haven't heard these stories, maybe stories that people haven't heard before, to open up and tell people, you know, for me, maybe it's the person at home listening who needs to hear, you need to believe in yourself and you can lose the weight and you can do the thing. And then, you know, when people might hear somebody else's story, they hear about a community and a person, you know, starting something that changed the fabric of that community. And so I'm excited to be alongside with you as you dive into some of these people, and also show the world that, you know, you obviously have this big thing with the show and everything going on with that, but then there's a lot of other parts of your life that are worth, you know, people paying attention to and worth you exploring. Right.
Well, thanks so much, man. The film that we made is on YouTube.
Yeah. As when we drop this, we'll do that as well. And it was a blast. It was basically a day in some slot canyons. And yeah, just a fun look at, you know, Elizabeth hanging out for the day, got a chance to take me along for the ride, took the dogs. And I think it's good for people to, you know, I mean, it was a fun day, beautiful scenery, but those are things that anybody, you know, could do with their significant others. Hey,
it was living.
Treat that as an option from listening to or from watching TV, and you know, get in the kitchen and get outside. Yeah. And the Heavy as Lead documentary is on YouTube, it's called Heavy as Lead. Documentary. Yeah. And also, we should just mention chasingacespodcast.com. If you're interested, you want to give some feedback, you can email me at chasingacespodcast.com. You know, follow along. That's Jason at chasingacespodcast.com. Correct. Did I say something else? You skipped the Jason part. Oh yeah. That's important. Yeah, reach out. We'd love to hear from people, you know, hear your feedback. Obviously we'll be on iTunes and everywhere else, so reviews will certainly help. really do want to try and make these conversations worth listening to.
Right.
That it's not only, fun for us to work on this, but it's valuable to people to spend their time, and that they can really get something from the people who are on here that, and there's more to come as well. I think we'll hopefully do more stuff like we did yesterday, but yesterday was a great start, and I think this is a great start. So looking forward to it.
All right, man.
All right.